And then we get to America. So by the time we had finished with that, we had the Reformation, we had states starting to form their own churches, we had Lutheranism with Germany, we had Calvinism with Switzerland, we had Anglicanism with England. We started to have each country, each state have its own Christian sect or denomination, until it got to the point to where it became chaotic for one to live within one country if they were a different sect or denomination, which is where we get the beginnings of religious persecution. Well, if you're trying to get away from all of that, what's better than this brand new continent that's right across the pond? And so what happens? We have everybody flee to the other side of the pond, to America at the time. What's the problem with that, though? What's going to happen if we all go over there when we want to run away from whatever we have in Europe?
You know, the people that came to America?
Yeah, what's it going to produce?
A melting pot.
Oh.
I used to like that word. All right, now, I don't anymore. All right, now, but why would it, and we all know why it would be a good word. Why would it be a bad word? Or what problems would it have?
Well, everyone would think that their way of practicing was better than their neighbors.
So,
and they would be judgmental because they don't practice our faith. They practice a different faith.
And I could say this as a former Baptist. What happens when two halves of a Baptist church disagree with each other?
There's a third Baptist church.
There you go. All right. There's an old saying that I had within the Baptist church: wherever two or more Baptists get together, a chicken dies. And wherever two or more Baptists disagree, we have a third church. Now, or a second one. And as humorous as that is, we're now looking at Protestantism with over 333,000 denominations.
Right.
All right.
Split all the way down.
And that's all because of religious license. So America became good for two things. One, financial gain, opportunities, ambition. Nothing particularly wrong with that, except that it can inspire greed. But also religious license. One could go and start their own church with their own interpretation of the Bible. And so that didn't provide a very good breeding ground for people who believed that everything was governed by one church and that everything was reconciled with one revelation. And so Catholics weren't around in surplus in the beginnings of America. But
Is that what led you to the one true church?
yes. Unity was the first thing that led me. I could talk about that forever. All right, now, don't make me. All right, now. Yeah, I've talked about this. I've talked about this. I get sidetracked very quickly. Next month's meeting, well, that's hers. So fast forward a little bit, because we have to do this in 30 minutes. 3,000 years in 30 minutes. All right. Fast forward, the Irish Catholic immigrant population starts to boom. All right. Right around, take a guess. So around the 1620s to 1640s, we just shoot up. And so this scares American Protestants because at this point there had not been any concern. We each teach our own thing. And we have the Massachusetts Old Deluder Satanist Act. And you want to guess who is being referred to as the Old Deluder Satan? All right, yes. And that's known at the time because if you read this right here, it says, it being the one chief project of that old defender Satan to keep men from the knowledge of the scriptures. And it was a common accusation. Obviously we know it is now, but this is where it begins. It was a common accusation that the Catholic Church tried to keep scripture from the common people. So this is directed straight at the Catholic Church. It may not say Catholic in there, so some people may quibble, but all documents at the time point towards it. So then what do? They say, here's how we're going to solve this. For every town that has at least 50 households, we're going to appoint one person to be the town teacher. And that people can come and be taught by them for a fee, but we're going to call it free education. All right? And so then if we have a town with 100 families or more, we're going to set up a grammar school. All right? And so put a pin in that. But their response to the old deluder Satan is public school. Just remember that. So, one, public school is a response to the Catholic Church. I hope that's still recording. All right.
Oh, yeah, the red thing is on.
Oh, man, it died. Keep going.
It's getting juicy, too.
I know.
Just barely a year.
I'm still recording here. All right. Go ahead. So then you also have all the Ivy League schools start up. Surely they're being neutral. Yeah. I had the privilege actually last week of being in D.C. with my school, and we went to the Museum of the Bible, which I really liked. I thought it was going to be solely Protestant, but it very much tries to be non-sectarian, and it's a blessing. But you got to see all aspects of Scripture throughout history. But there's a section that talks about the Ivy League schools, and I was able to read the actual pages from the time that confirm this, that these schools started up because the pastors were dying that were coming to America. They set up these schools so that new pastors could be formed. So keep in mind the irony with most of these schools now, where they're at, that they were all formed to form pastors, like preachers and religious devout people. I'm looking at you, Harvard. Now, sorry, Miss Hendershot. Now, but you have this. So you have the start of public schools that goes in tandem with the start of Ivy League schools, none of which are Catholic. You have all of these formed to continue to perpetuate the Protestant education, and they are starting to receive funds from the state at this time. In fact, the public schools already were. When they started with the old Deluder Satan Act in 1647, they kind of got off the ground, but it wasn't until the mid-18th century, so about 100 years later, with the Land Ordinance Act and the United States starting to actually enforce taxes, that they were able to really get public schools off the ground. So again, as you think of all the humorous things there, that public schools are a reaction to Catholic school, we only have public schools because of taxes. So if we just cut taxes, all right? And not to put too much of a pin in this, but if it's not clear that this is all a direct reaction to Catholic education, these were political cartoons at the time. The bishops, in response to the Irish immigrant, Catholic immigrant population, and just a boon in Catholic immigrants, the bishops started trying to set up schools, Catholic schools, and they wanted public funding because at the time everyone was getting public funding. And what do we see? Gotta love it here. We got the Vatican in the background. We got crocodiles with bishop's mitres on. All right, and they're coming up to attack all these poor children. And so, oh, and look, he has a Bible stuck in his jacket because it's going to save him from the crocodile. All right, okay. Why my wife's looking at it. Next. All right, and if it isn't worse, they start to set up non-sectarian rules. So the way that was gotten around at this point to be able to exclude Catholic education from public funding was they came up with a non-sectarian rule. They came up with the Blaine Amendments as well, if you've heard of those. But they basically said there will be no such thing as a sectarian school, a Catholic, Protestant, Baptist, Methodist. But we're going to strike a compromise. We'll allow Scripture. So the problem there being, again, is that still leans towards a Protestant education. While we subscribe to sacred Scripture, what's cut out?
7 books.
7 books, first of all, bingo. All right, didn't think of that one actually when I put this together. Thank you. Sacred tradition as well. All right, or church authority. It's not to say that those would have been imposed upon Protestant students, but if you had a Catholic school where people willingly joined and enrolled in the Catholic school, why could they not receive public funding if the public schools that were supposed to be non-sectarian were receiving funding while promoting the Protestant edition of the Bible? So then you see,
There's a nice little subtext.
yes, there's a nice little subtext here. What does it say? The church need not apply. So reference to those Irish immigrants again. And so you have the Triple Crown, the Pope trying to come in and impose Rome and edicts and decrees and hand them to the students, while there's a nice little sign that said, no sect can rule this school.
You want me to read the bottom caption?
Go ahead.
It says, little Jonathan, Miss Columbia will not try your teaching as it has proved to be injurious in Dame Europa's school that our adopted children who left her don't care to learn under that system again. And it says, the infallible one. Oh, you godless infidel vipers, I will be revenged on you, for I keep the keys of heaven.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
So no vitriol or animus there. All right. All right, next slide. And just as a little sideway, if those comics look familiar, they're by the same guy, Thomas Nast, who was responsible for why we have Santa Claus now and St. Nicholas. We look at this and we think, holly jolly, this was meant to make fun of St. Nicholas at the time. Jokes on them, everybody likes Santa Claus now. All right. But this is supposed to be a bastardization of St. Nicholas at the time. So the same man that did this image, which you might recognize it, did those other two images as well. So
That's neat.
Why should squish your baby?
next.
He's just holding. He's holding the dog.
So then, even though I said the scientific revolution, the Renaissance, Reformation knocked out reason and revelation from classical education,